Okay, welcome back. This is maybe the last of the process to synthesis lectures for spring of 21. I do have one more planned that's related to the wrap up. I used to make a lecture for a wrap up for the test, so this will be kind of based off of that. I'm sure Professor Dickey will also do some sort of review session for however he's going to do the test. But anyway, this lecture is titled Dialogue, and it's kind of a wrap up of all the previous lectures, really talking about process and um, and concept and product and synthesis, and putting all of that together. Where we're talking about how different artists influence each other, and so the main point, the story of this lecture, is the idea of a conversation, of a dialogue between artists, and that when artists don't make their work in a vacuum, and that every artist that we've been looking at has had lots of artists that were influences on them, and that their body of work is really, in some ways, a commentary on all the previous bodies of work. And so I thought of starting with this image because it shows how an artist like Philip Guston, he saw himself as, just like I think almost every artist sees themselves as part of a tradition, an inheritor of concepts and of ideas from other artists. And many of them are contemporaries, but many of them can trace back far into the past, such as um, Guston's kind of like top five here that go all the way back to Giotto. So this lecture kind of is going to cut through a number of different artists and just show a number of different ways that they influence each other. And I could have started any number of places. I could have started with Frank Stella and his lecture on Caravaggio, and then also about James Turrell and how he was influenced by Caravaggio, and that changed the way he thought about painting, and that led to the kind of work that he made. But for whatever reasons, I decided to start with Jeff Koons. And so we've seen a lot of Jeff Koons throughout this class, and probably we're thinking of Jeff Koons primarily in terms of work like this or the previous piece. But many of you may not know exactly what his work looked like when he first started. And he was heavily influenced by Duchamp, and still is, but especially at the beginning of his career. And he was making essentially his own versions of ready-mades, where he was taking these vacuum cleaners, these very old-fashioned, old-school vacuum cleaners. This is back in the early 80s. So these were, in terms of design, were already considered very antique sort of design vacuum cleaners, and then putting them in these really pristine plexiglass box situations with um, lighting on the inside. And so kind of like doing Duchamp, but doing it in a slightly different way. And what's interesting is that that kind of find some stuff and put in a plexiglass box was an idea that didn't didn't end there. Damien Hirst took that idea up and did it one better, you might say, by putting a shark or other animals in these plexiglass boxes. I really like the cow where it's done in slices. I like how the anatomical kind of scientific nature of it here with this piece right there. And but of course, Damien Hirst is a highly controversial artist, and lots of people were interested in that, related to that. And one artist decided to make a piece, um, doing a painting of Damien Hirst, and then putting that in a plexiglass box, and then putting that plexiglass box in a field of cows. So it was kind of reversed, you know. Damien was in the field, and the cows were observing him. And lots of people have made other pieces based off of current events and the news and history. I noticed that although this isn't actually Lego, but a sort of a off-brand Lego company makes a toy set where you can have your own Damien Hirst shark box piece. And when I saw this piece here with the cows looking at Damien Hirst, that made me immediately think of Mark Tansey. And this piece, the very first time I ever went to the Met, I think it was probably about 10 years old, and I saw this painting was up at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's just it floored me. I just it took me a while just to even think about it. And the idea was like, here are these scientists trying to see whether a cow could recognize cows in a painting. And it is a very humorous commentary on art in general. And Mark Tansey is both a working illustrator as well as a studio artist. And a lot of the art he makes is in some ways kind of poking fun at the art world in general. And this piece is titled Action Painting, which is its own type of pun, both, because it's one of his more expressive and loose paintings. He's pretty tight as a painter, but also because he's kind of making fun of the art of the 50s and 60s, where it was very loose abstract expressionism, and it was called action painting. Roy Lichtenstein was also interested in kind of mocking that kind of thing. So in his at a certain period, I think this was maybe 67, he was making paintings that took the whole idea of the abstract expressionist gestural brushstroke and kind of blowing it up and recontextualizing it, where now the brushstroke has become this graphic mark that has been very carefully painted, and then all the colors are put down dot by dot in a grid system. And this comes out of previous works. Probably the earliest one where he had a brush mark was this one, which was just a where he took a scene from a comic book and then kind of blew it up as a painting. And then from this one, he kind of had a number of paintings that were just explorations of a single brush stroke on a canvas. And then here's one you might consider the original, right? This is the type of artwork that both Mark Tansey and Lichtenstein were kind of in some ways honoring and in some ways making fun of. All right, let's start another path. Starting with Rachel Whiteread, we can see a whole dialogue about sculpture and especially about British sculpture. And we've talked about this before, how in a way Rachel Whiteread's work seems very kind of avant-garde and it's like pushing in a new direction. But in some ways it's very much a body of sculptural work that's about getting back to basics, because it's about looking at this fundamental idea in sculpture, which is the relationship between positive and negative volumes. And we can see that dialogue in British sculpture. Someone like Henry Moore, who was probably the most famous British sculptor, was very much interested in the way positive volume created negative volume spaces. And he got that very much from sort of the British obsession with especially Bernini, but other Baroque sculptors and their interest in negative volumes and creating that. And then we can see that kind of influence on someone like Rebecca Warren, and we can see kind of this a similar kind of aesthetic in Cornelia Parker. It's interesting that Cornelia Parker's work and let's go back to Rachel Whiteread, developing right about the same time, although Cornelia Parker is a little bit older than Rachel Whiteread. And here, like, Rachel Whiteread is making a piece where she's taking a brownstone and completely recontextualizing it by removing the whole building and only making a cast of the interior space of it. The air that we would breathe has become solid concrete. And Cornelia Parker has done something different, where she's taken a shed, like a garden shed. She had the military come by and blow it up, and then she has placed all the blown up pieces in hanging from different points, so that they're kind of almost like they're in mid explosion. And so she also took something very familiar, like just a regular garden shed, and then transformed it. And so Rebecca Warren in some ways represents kind of she's both at that intersection of British sculpture and those ideas about volume, but she's also part of this tradition of British art being interested in figurative work and a particular British aesthetic of like looking at figurative pieces and being extremely kind of obsessive about the body. And that, I think, has its roots in Alberto Giacometti. Oh, there's my timer. Giacometti obviously is not a British artist, he's a Swiss artist, but highly influential on British art. And Giacometti and that influence on people like Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud. I could have also included, who else? Jenny Saville. I should have. I don't know why I missed it. Anyway, we have to end there, and then I'll get back to the next artist, who is Frank Auerbach, in just